I've found often in my life when I've been travelling, libraries have been somewhere that I've sought out as a sort of safe space too, and a space where you can discover something about the place you're in.
Welcome to A Third Place, a podcast about the importance of public spaces in the personal and professional development of prominent Australians. This series celebrates the 60th anniversary of the University of Melbourne's Baillieu Library as a special third place between home and work. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. In today's episode, I spoke with the multi-talented Alice Garner. Some of you may be familiar with her work as an actor in TV shows including Sea Change, but Alice has also worked as a writer, musician, historian, and now as a passionate teacher. We spoke about the importance of public spaces like libraries as part of the civic framework. The Baillieu Library features prominently in Alice's book, The Student Chronicles, and I began by asking her about her recollections.
I spent a lot of time in the Baillieu, which was a very, maybe not very different, but different place from what it is now. When I started my undergraduate degree in arts here, I didn't have a computer, and most people I knew didn't have one. We didn't have phones, So the library was the place we went to for information, for reading. There's something specific about a university library, and I think that if you're interested in something, whether or not it's on your recommended reading or not, you can go on this journey of discovery and just by standing in front of the bookshelf, you find the book you wanted, or maybe you don't, and then you look to either side and you discover that, really the whole sort of all of the people who are writing about that area. And so you have these accidental discoveries all the time.
And did you have a special space there when you were an undergraduate that you'd normally go to that had a particular tone about it?
I think I mainly did my reading in that big space. I can't even remember what it's called now, but when you walk in and you go left and there's that big open reading room, which was where the recommended reading, the articles were, and there were big windows looking out onto the South Lawn and gum trees. So you could read and be in that space, and it was a silent space, but you could also see the world outside and kind of drift off every now and then if you wanted to.
In this series of podcasts, we're exploring this notion of third spaces, particularly libraries, but not only libraries. And I'm wondering for you, as someone who's had such a rich and varied creative life as a writer, researcher, musician, TV, film, stage actor, teacher, parent, have third places like this always been important to you, to have a place that's special?
I've always loved libraries, and I loved libraries as a kid, just being able to sit somewhere and read for hours on end. And I was thinking about this the other day, that, unlike many places, you can go there and stay there the whole day. It's free and nobody's going to move you on. They want you to be there. No matter who you are, how old you are, what you're interested in, you're welcomed, And I've found often in my life, if there have been times when I've been travelling, libraries have been somewhere that I've sought out as a sort of safe space too, and a space where you can discover something about the place you're in.
Yes, it's interesting when municipalities or governments who see libraries as essentially cost centres and decide it's important to rationalise them or even to close some down, that one of the effects that people realise is that actually people are using them for all sorts of reasons. They're not just using them to go and borrow books, but they're actually a sort of community hub in a way, in the way that you've been describing.
If you think about, for example, students, I would have some that I teach now who don't have, for example, Wi-Fi or books at home. Or they might have a lot of siblings and it's really noisy, or they may be unhappy at home, things aren't going well, but they could go to the library as a place where they can work, focus, get help, find the resources they need. I think also for people who might be lonely and isolated in their lives. Might be an older person whose partner has died, or their kids have moved away, or they, whatever. But the library is somewhere they could go and have a conversation with someone, feel part of a community.
And Alice, with that in mind, do you think that libraries today have changed, or have they kept those essential characteristics of essentially being quiet places for study and reading and reflection?
No, it's harder to escape into the library, I think. There are still some corners where you could sort of sit and maybe turn your back to the world, but the soundscape of the library is an important thing, and I think particularly, I know, I have a few students who, say on the spectrum, who find it difficult when there's a lot of visual and auditory stimuli and they need some quiet, and finding that space is increasingly difficult. And I think that is something that's important to think about. And some libraries and municipal libraries who may be pressed for space, I notice they will have rooms that are kind of glassed off, which are really clearly labelled as silent working spaces. It's a little bit like another third space would be those train carriages that are called silent train carriages. I love that idea that, yes, we're all, in this shared space, but we all want to be silent in our own thoughts or our own reading.
Alice, as a teacher, you're under extraordinary pressures of time. I wonder whether you still have a third place, a special place you go to for rejuvenation and rest.
I don't use those spaces as much as I used to, and that's sort of sad, really. I guess, weirdly, sometimes public transport is that, or maybe sitting in a cafe. It's that space where people are around you, but you can be by yourself. I think that's what it is. It's kind of feeling like you're within the community, but you've got space to think your own thoughts. That's what that means to me. And I have to mention this because it's important. One of my first jobs out of school was working at the State Library. I was 17, I was quite young finishing school, and the idea was that I would almost have a sort of apprenticeship in the different areas of the library, and I started off in the bookbindery. This was a time in my life when I'd just finished school and I was going out too much, well, not too much, a lot, and I was, drinking quite a bit, staying out late, not getting enough sleep. And I really remember those stacks as being this very silent, peaceful, it was like a bubble. It was away from the world. And the smell of, I guess, kind of mouldy pages in really some very old books was kind of intoxicating. And I remember sometimes I would just sort of sit down in in the narrow aisles between the bookshelves and just kind of plant myself there for a good half an hour, shut my eyes and have a little nap. And it was my way of kind of coping with the social life I was having out there. I apologise to my employers for using my time in this way, but it was, I remember that very strongly.
But you're someone who seems to have had almost a tactile relationship with libraries and with books and writing.
Yeah. And there is, of course, the other kind of writing that goes on in libraries, which is the graffiti on the toilet walls, which, in the Baillieu, there was always a lot of interest in graffiti. I don't know if it's there anymore. I'm guessing it's not, because things are a lot cleaner these days. And often people would write quite long and quite heartfelt sort of accounts of things that were going on in their lives, questions about relationships and sex and, and people would answer them. And then it would become a dialogue. And I did occasionally contribute to those conversations with my texter, and they felt like important conversations. People were actually asking questions they didn't feel they could ask outside to their friends or families or anyone, and that's where they asked those questions.
Oh, sadly, the male conversations didn't reflect that. They tended to be rather simple and demonstrative. I wonder if we could turn to a different matter now and consider your period as an actor and whether there were important third places during the years of your growth in that career.
Acted in a couple of feature films in Sydney. This is in the sort of mid-90s, I suppose. And I remember sort of having this realisation that I was getting to meet some actors who just got out of NIDA, and I realised what an insular world they lived in. It was totally obsessed with acting and nothing else. That's all they talked about. There was no sort of awareness of the wider world and other things that were going on, and I was quite taken aback by that. And I realised that having that life of libraries and university and reading and so on kept me connected with things beyond what can become a very restrictive and insular world of showbiz.
And Alice, speaking of insular worlds, a lot of people find that when they travel, oddly enough, that it can be an isolating, even insular sort of experience. And I wonder what your experience has been of travel and of the importance of third places.
I do have a memory of catching a train. It was from Byron Bay back to Melbourne, but the train had to stop in Sydney. And I had, I think, $2.50. And I was sleeping. It was sort of an overnight, I think. And then I had a bunch of hours during the day in Sydney that I had to kill before getting on the next train back to Melbourne. And it was one of those moments where you go, wow, I really do only have $2.50 and I'm going to have to make this last. So I thought about where are the free places I can go and have a good day. And I thought, all right, there's the Botanic Gardens. I have a book in my bag, so that's already a few hours sorted. And then there's the gallery, the National Gallery. And I knew it was free. So I organised my day. So I had a few hours of reading in the gardens and then went into the art gallery and spent hours in there just wandering around. And there is so much pleasure to be got from these institutions that are there, that are free, that are for us. Having that sense of I can actually create this fantastic day of just being in these places by myself. I wasn't seeking company, and I think some people go to those places to find company and to talk to people. I think for me it hasn't been that. It's been more about a place where I've liked to be alone.
Thanks for listening to A Third Place. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. Today's episode is brought to you by the Baillieu Library and Learning Environments at the University of Melbourne. It was produced by Chris Parlow and Phil Shaw. Recorded by Gavin Neighbour at the Hallwood Recording Studio. Edited by Phil Shaw, David Withers and Catherine Hayhoe. Rory Mullen is our intern, and our associate producers are Andrea Hurt and Ashley Sutherland for the Baillieu Library, and Eileen Wall for Learning Environments.